in an exercise that we do, that I have done and will do with all of the guests, is kind of this incremental curve of warming into the questions as the conversation heats up. So to do that, there's two or three that I like to do at the start of every interview. So with that being said, the first question is always, what is a novel or a book that you've read that you believe everybody should read, and why?
One that I've read that everybody should read, and why? Do you know? I I'm going to say the Harry Potter novels,
Mm.
and I'm going to say that because they are genius writing, um, and great stories. But do you know what? They are great stories that enable you to just remember what it's like to read a book and enjoy reading, because it's a great thing to do without having to concentrate too much on the underlying message or trying to think about what the subtext might be all about. You can just read a book and have a great time. So that's what I'd say to that question.
I think that's a great answer, and I know exactly what you mean. There's kind of that air of whimsy that makes every page just not easy, but kind of delightful. And
Yeah,
I think that there has to be something to be said that in the same way that reading, you could watch a television for fun, you should be able to read a book purely for fun and escapism and where it takes you, rather than you say philosophizing and moralizing on deeper issues. Not everything has to be Milan Kunderas. I would say good zag, good zag. We've had some interesting ones. This one always gets me because you look at a person and you think they're going to hit me with something really serious, or they're going to use the platform to promote something that not elevates their own
yeah,
appearance on the outside. But I think I've got some really genuinely passionate responses on what sticks with
yeah.
them. So thank you for that.
No, no
And
worries.
then the next question I would say is, this one's a bit more personal. For someone who has seen so much of the world, where do you go when your mind is, just on and off switch? Where do you escape to when you're on the train, on the bus, on the way to work?
That's another really good question. Do you know, I think that the answer to that question changes.
Mm.
And it changes depending, I think, on what's going on at the time. So, having spent a lot of time in Dubai for work in the UAE, quite often, if I'm in work mode, I will kind of drift off to wonder what on earth it would have been like if I was still in Dubai right now. You'll know that my timing of getting home from Dubai was lucky, given the lockdown that happened very shortly after I came home. So that's somewhere I think about quite a lot. I think personally, um, I have happier spots in the Mediterranean, particularly in the Greek islands,
Mm.
a place that you've been to as well. And that little kind of taverna that you sit in with great simple Greek home cooked food and a beer with the sea in the background is a great place that my mind takes me to in periods of quiet. But I am very lucky because I've got lots of places to choose from, but those are probably my two go-to places.
I think it's a very beautiful answer because it's such a peaceful place and it's so full of life and hospitality. I think that was when I was in Greece, that was the thing that I really, really appreciated and loved. Just how hospitable every restaurant and new landmark was, and that overall sense of welcome.
Yeah.
Which I guess kind of tidily winds into the next question, which would be, where as a man was your favorite place to go, and then again, where was your favorite place to show your child as a father?
So as a man, so as a single traveller, you mean?
Yeah, I just mean as a single independent guy who was learning more about the world, and then from a different perspective of showing somebody else about the world, well, something of the world.
So some of my greatest adventures have been in the US,
Hmm.
and in particular, spent a lot of time out in the US in previous role with Virgin. and spent a lot of time on the West Coast, so California and then Washington, particularly Washington State, up on the border. And Seattle and LA as probably two of the most exciting places I've been to, apart from what I've done with the family. Two cities that are completely different, but have some real magic attached to them and some real grandeur. I mean, Los Angeles. I remember and will never forget the first time I went there, flying over in the aeroplane and being able to see out the window for what seemed like an eternity, flying over the city before you landed. Just the sheer scale and size of the place has always stayed with me. And then Seattle was the first place I went to in the US back when I was about 17 years old.
Wow.
And again, I had expected to arrive in New York, and Seattle really isn't the slightest bit like New York. And so at the time, I thought I'd gone and arrived at the wrong country entirely. And since being back a few times, and Seattle's actually a really amazing city. It's beautiful and sat on the waterfront. But so very completely different to LA. So those two places, I love the States anyway. As per Greece, directly related to food, particularly love eating in the States because it's amazing. But just traveling around and the wealth of characters you see, and I don't know, there's this thing about just the freedom they enjoy in the United States. And it's not that we're not free here, but they have this thing where actually, you know, walking down the seafront is something they just do because they do. Whereas over here, you live by the sea, but you walk by the sea for 2 days after you move there, and then you never do it again because it's there. You take it for granted. So I like the way they hold dear their freedoms. And then the best place I've ever taken the girls has to be the Taj Mahal in India, second to none. Just unbelievable. We were so lucky. We went for a weekend when we were living in Dubai, and we flew into Delhi in the middle of the night, and it all kind of started there, really. We ended up getting a couple of hours sleep before we then caught a train from Delhi down to Agra, and we then stayed in a little hotel, and then we did the whole thing, the whole Taj Mahal thing. We did the tour, we went across the river, got the photos, but just incredible. And the sort of thing, in actual fact, it had a bigger impact after we'd been than whilst we were there, because while you're there, you're just kind of like, it's so in your face.
Yeah,
the cows walking across the road and all that kind of stuff. But when you kind of come back and you reflect on it afterwards, just the scale of the place again, but also the fact that this building, this place is centuries and centuries and centuries old, and the intricacy of the design and the building, that 500 meters from the building itself, and you can look through one of the kind of pieces of marble framework got in the gardens, and you look through at a certain angle, and you can see all the way through the building to the other side, and you can see the sun, and the detail that's gone into that building for that age is quite incredible. So yeah, and great to do that with Janet. Really enjoyed it.
I think the majesty of that would. How are you not breathtaken by it? And it's really interesting because I imagine it's the opportunity in the States. As a young guy in the state on the West Coast, I mean, the sky really literally quite is the limit. And it's just the idea of that much, not just stuff, but that many avenues to that many different things, and that much life just compressed in that space at that age must have been a really incredible experience. And I think it is interesting that something so spiritually moving as the Taj Mahal, and something so grand on a historical and a cultural scale, is what stayed with you, rather than, say, I don't know, the sunny Barbadoses and or the Mediterranean sunsets. And I think that there's something quite beautiful that a work of human achievement outranks perhaps, say, I don't know, a circadian summer in Barbados.
Yeah.
On parenting, what's something as a parent that you learned that you wished you knew as a child?
Oh God. Not to take myself too seriously.
Mm.
Have fun, and don't sweat the big stuff. Um, Spent far too long worrying about what I was going to do, where I was going to be, how I was going to earn money, what a career was going to be, and actually none of it matters.
Mm.
It just doesn't matter because it falls into place. Do what you love
I think it's good
and
advice.
love what you do. That's what I wish I'd known when I was younger.
Because the rat race can be really daunting, and as a young person, sometimes that need to get ahead often outweighs what you want to do. So I think that is
Yeah.
great advice. What are your fears though? What's something that the older that you get, the more you fear now than you did then?
Oh God, you know what? Being a grumpy little old man with those trousers that come up over your stomach and like that little wispy bit of hair on your face that you never shave off properly, that everybody avoids on the bus. Just don't want to be that guy.
I think that's a very rational
and
fear.
you and you know the guy I'm talking
I
about.
do exactly know the guy. So I mean, and I'm glad that you didn't turn around and say something really existentially terrifying, because I think maybe we don't need any more of that in the world than we already have. Um,
Yeah, absolutely right.
and I think that, do you find, because this is something I certainly struggle with, do you find that a little bit of, do you think that your identity has developed since you've become a parent, or do you think that it's something that has been reduced? Because sometimes it's really difficult, well, as a child it's nearly impossible to separate parent from person and see what lies underneath that title.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because um, Ella will refer to my childhood as the olden days, which is exactly what I used to refer to my parents' childhood as, and particularly my grandmother. Oh my word, she was quite literally from prehistoric times. So that kind of like that thing about time, um, and quantifying a period of time, and understanding that time moves very slowly, but at the same time it's gone really quickly. I think changes your opinion as you get older, and of course as your child grows, so you're continuing to grow as well.
Mm.
And I think the older you get, the more you realize that you don't know very much, but you know a little bit more than you did before. Um, and you become more comfortable with that as you get older, so you stop trying to, I think, provide all the answers to all the questions, because it's just not necessary. And at the same time, helpfully, as you get older, so you realize that your parents don't actually know the answer to all the questions either. And you get to this kind of fun stage where we're all at the moment, where actually you try and find out the answers together. So you just sit and work it out. And that's really cool. Not that not that you ever forget the charm and the delight that you have in holding your little girl or your little boy's hand as you kind of like teach them to walk, and you go to the shops, and you know all that good stuff. But I think as you relax into parenting to some degree, you become more comfortable in your own skin, certainly. And once you start to do that, it becomes a little bit easier. But there's no rule book. So I mean, all parents, I think, just make up their own set of rules. I do for sure. And your mum does, and your dad does, and you just hope that they're the right rules, because you haven't got anybody that's going to tell you that they are or they're not. Apart from your child, who's going to tell you they're the wrong rules, because that's the job of the child.
So there's a lot of confidence. Well, there's a lot of self-belief that that did you ever find that your confidence was shaken at times, that maybe that set of rules was the wrong or the right one, or did you just have to commit to that kind of vision of faith in what you were doing was best for your kid?
I think you question yourself every day, Hamish, that you're doing the right thing and that you're following the right path. But you have to trust your judgment. And again, that gets a bit old. As you get a bit older, that gets a bit easier. Just because you know a few more things you did before. You don't know it all, obviously, but and you learn the lessons as you go. I think you start to know what you're looking for a little bit as well. So you ask broader questions, and you look a little bit further, because your world expands, beyond what you can see in front of you. But that is a function or part of growing up in the world, really. That day that you realise the world's actually massive,
not just this. Sorry,
and that day
the
is.
Audience who won't be able to see, I was motioning to myself, but the minute that you
But I think that's when. And so, do I ever? Am I ever uncertain, or do I ever question myself? I mean, 100% all the time. But you have to stand by your decisions, right? And just as you do, and Ella does, and Janet does, Auntie Janet, and your mum and granddad, sometimes you get it right, sometimes you get it wrong. But if you are broadly getting it right more times you're getting it wrong, and if you're a good person, you're going to be okay broadly in the end.
And I think that as a young person, there's actually a lot of comfort to be taken in what you've said, because I think there's a notion that because an idea is old, that it is per se worthy, and sometimes that can be really, really hard to maneuver around, because you feel that until I'm this age, I'm not going to have the answers. How can I have that confidence in myself? But actually, not admitting, but acknowledging that nobody has all of the answers makes that a lot easier to face, because I think the idea that, because actually also it stops the letdown, because not everybody does get it right all of the time. And to think that you must have all of the answers because you're this age, or to think that someone else, can be really, really heartbreaking when they don't. So I think that that's really good advice, not to put yourself, but other people on that pedestal, and acknowledge humanity. And there's definitely an empathy there. So I think thank you, and the audience at home should also thank you. On the subject, on the subject of travel, was it your love of aerospace? What roots that? Is it escapism? Is it curiosity? What underlies that, not nomadic, but adventurous lifestyle?
It's really, really easy. It started with an obsession with aircraft. My grandmother, or your great grandmother, spent a long time in the States just after our grandfather died, which I don't really remember. I think it was probably before my time, but she did some nannying in Boston. So she was flitting backwards and forwards to some degree between London and Boston. And so as a special treat, I would be able to go meet her from Heathrow, and my mum and dad would take me up to Heathrow, and I'd sit and watch the planes. Well, as you'll know yourself, as a sort of 4, 5, 6-year-old child boy, watching blooming great big jumbo jets flying around, right? Give me some candy as well, and I'm done, kind of stuff. So I had an obsession with that, and then an obsession with getting on one of these airplanes, which I didn't manage to do until I was a little bit older than that. But the first time I then flew, I flew from Southampton with your grandparents to Guernsey one time on a little airplane with turbo prop thing. But we had an au pair an au pair type person that came and spent summer learning English, living at our house with me and your mum and Nanny, and we got really good friends with her, with Eva, and she lived in San Sebastian in Spain. And I, long story short, got the chance to fly to San Sebastian, spend 2 weeks with them as a kind of like, do you know what? I had a great time. Come and see. So off I went to Heathrow, and eventually got for the first time onto a 737, which was the biggest airplane I'd ever been on. And I mean, to be honest, I could have just gone there and back for 2 weeks. I didn't need to do any more. That was the highlight. I remember keeping all the napkins and all everything, even the little milk thing that went with the coffee. Unbelievable. Anyway, so then I had then a couple of chances to travel when I was then coming out of school. Some friends of mine went to Australia, and I was to go and join them. I got a job instead, so my sort of 6-8 months in Australia became a 3-week holiday. But I flew with an airline who still operate today, in fact, on a really cheap ticket to Perth.
Okay.
Now, you don't need to know anything more than Perth is in Australia, which is very far from London. And I, therefore, got a really cheap ticket. At the time, it was about 400 quid.
Ooh.
Now, that was as cheap then for going to Australia as it sounds today in terms of relativity. Well, this aeroplane took me from London to Dubai. It stopped. Then it took me from Dubai to Singapore and stopped. Then it took me to Borneo, to Brunei, actually, on Borneo Island, Bandar Seri Begawan, and stopped. Then it flew to Darwin and stopped. Well, what seemed about 3 weeks later, I arrived in Perth. And then had the most glorious time with them, kind of like out the back of a car, camping and driving all around Western Australia. And then did the same thing on the way back. And by that point, it was inevitable that I would never do anything other than working travel ever in my life. And actually, those days were the enchanting days of it. What I do these days is far more process-driven. It's logistics. It's leadership. But the travel stuff that I used to do was just magical. I mean, just amazing. It's too good. But I love flying. A bit geeky. You know this.
I do, and I think that sense of awe, the idea that something that people can make can be that grand and not sleek. That's the thing with planes. I remember as a kid just being in complete amazement at how graceful, this massive metal bird-looking thing was when it got off the ground, and I completely empathize with that sense of seeing more and wanting to drive more, because there to me is definitely a correlation between the escapist a writer feels constructing a world in their head 1,000 miles away, and that wants to see other places, and I think almost a feedback loop in the sense that it fuels one and the other. So it is interesting that you say that. What
flying is really clever.
Yeah,
and we turn it to commodity, right? So you want to pay 50 quid to go to Spain. So we make it possible, we make it so. In actual fact, what you are doing is you are getting into a big metal tube and you are being catapulted to 40,000 feet and getting somewhere you really shouldn't be 2 hours later. And even now, when I go to some of these places, especially when I was in Dubai flying all over the place for that job, always take a moment. So when I was in that Perth trip that I referenced to, they picked me up from the airport about 10 o'clock at night. Well, of course, I was wired, right? Yeah. And probably slightly drunk, if I'm really honest. So off we went to a place called Kings Park in Perth, which is on the side of the river, and sat up on there. And there was, like these big, like red moons, the pink moon, I think we had the other day, the massive moon. Yeah, it was one of those. Sat and watched this come up over Kings Park. I was like, oh my dear God, I'm so far from home. And so I always look out for the moon. But yes, it is very clever. Never forget how clever it is in actual fact to go on a plane, even if it's only EasyJet.
I can't be understated as well, because actually if we could, in a hand, move that, if it wasn't something that you actually actively had to go on and do and could just do passively, even then, even the idea of that is just mind-bending. Being able to move freely through space to that degree is just insane. There was one question that I really actually quite liked. I don't normally write them down, but there was one that I wrote, and I thought that this was, who's someone that you idolize? And if you don't idolize anybody, do you think that it's dangerous or? Well, yeah. What are your thoughts on reverence?
I think idolize is a really big word, and no, I don't have anybody actually that I idolize. I have some people that I admire quite strongly, and some of those people I've worked with that aren't at all famous, but are just really good people. Who are really good at what they do. So there's one guy called Kevin Dudley, who is just the most delightful gentleman ever. I've worked with him for many years during my history in all sorts of different places, in several different jobs, actually. Just an all-round great guy. And I know a couple of people like that, that I've met through my career, been fortunate enough to meet through my career. There's some sports people that I think, are really good at their sport, have been really good at their sport, that I think, they are good people, but I don't tend to look at people and go, oh God, I wish I was more like that, or if only I could be that. Because I don't think I know yet what that is,
Yeah.
particularly.
And I think it's interesting because this is a question that I really want to key on the older and the younger generation. Because I think that as we see the rise of celebrity culture and stardom, and I say the rise, I mean, it's already hit the stratosphere. You know what I mean? It's already wildly, wildly beyond comprehension. But I think the idea that when that is invoked in your life and at those developmental stages where a lot of your esteem and sense of self is underpinned by your peers and what's relevant and popular, it's interesting to me to see where people stand on reverence. I think it's really sweet that the first thing you went to was co-workers who were good people and sports, because I think athletes are the closest thing to modern titans that you would see 1,000 years of yore in mythology. But it is genuinely interesting to me because I really, really wonder if the younger people will say, well, I wish that I was more like this so I could capture this. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. I've already reached body perfection, obviously.
Well, as an Adonis.
Adonis, have an amazing sense of humour and sing like an angel. So all of that stuff has been accomplished already.
There's not a lot higher that your ceiling can go. Let me just quickly find one more because I am aware that I am eating into your time, and I have.
Right.
This has been the best part about this is that the more that I record, the more I get to watch back, which sounds on the surface like quite a difficult, but it's actually really nice because it's just hours that I will forever have of these moments with these people, which is a really beautiful and timeless thing.
Kind of cool.
I think, as not as an old person, because I'd never call you old.
Careful.
But as someone who's more senior and who's had more experience in this field, how do you avoid objectifying happiness, and where do you find it?
How do I avoid objectifying happiness? God. I think a bit of taking each day as it comes. Sing like there's no one listening and dance like there's no one watching. Just enjoy the moment. And there's so many moments. So every day has a little moment. And so just enjoy that. I mean, today hasn't been the most spectacular day in my career. I'll be quite honest. It's been relatively mundane / a bit crap. But do you know what? I had a little moment when Ella came in. We were talking about something and it just raised a giggle, actually. I had a bit of a laugh, lasted for 30 seconds, but actually it was a moment of joy and happiness. And that'll do. I'll take that. Thanks very much. And some have more than others. And sometimes it's really difficult, isn't it, to find them, and then perhaps stop looking so hard. I think all of us, to a large degree, make an industry out of making things really hard for ourselves, and finding obstacles to everything, reasons why we can't. I was watching a relevant politician in the news today. And yet again noted that there was a whole list of things that shouldn't, couldn't, wouldn't, mustn't happen, but not actually any indication of what should. And for fear of veering into the politics here, which is clearly not the intention, I was just interested because, in fact, I think we do that in all sorts of different ways for all of us. And sometimes you just go, why not? What's the worst that can happen, right?
I think that's a really, really, really good point. And I think that a lot of that actually runs not synonymous, but analogous to kind of the presence and mindfulness and not meditation almost, but being in the moment and the benefits of it. And I think that that's great advice for anyone to get. And actually, I will look out for that the next time I watch a popular or a populist speaker talk, because
Yeah.
you know the line from Ratatouille, "The role of a critic is easy."
Yeah.
It's kind of that. That's the
Yeah.
second episode, and the second time that exact. Well, not, but I've used that thing anyway.
Yeah. But you're right.
But you are right, because it is a lot easier to tear things down and point at everything that we hate and want to change in the world for, for the better, but not how we do that or what we already like that's there.
Goes back to your question about uh, idols and reverence, doesn't it? If you're constantly looking for something else, you're constantly trying to find something that's just out of reach, then you're never going to be happy, right? So be happy with your lot. So instead of trying to get a bigger house, look at your own house and go, well, I quite like it, actually. I'd prefer it with a blue wall, so I'll paint the wall blue. It's a lot easier to achieve than going off to buy a new house. Take it from one who knows from bitter experience that finding new houses is very difficult. Blue wall is much easier. I think we, and it's easy as well, I think, to talk to you about it. Much harder for me to then, in that scenario, reflect on my own advice stroke opinion and slow down, because life goes so quickly and you're on this kind of train, got to. So I must write that on a post-it and put it on my wall.
Enjoy and embrace each day more.
Yeah, take it one step at a time.
And it's profound enough that it doesn't veer into Facebook territory, but it's easy enough to remember. You are maybe a connoisseur of cuisine. That be maybe a little inflated.
I love eating.
I like food.
I really like food.
What makes a better chef? A chef who can take good ingredients and turn it into a fantastic meal, or a chef who can take average ingredients and turn it into a good meal?
I think so. Great ingredients make it into a fantastic meal, or average ingredients into a good meal. I think that probably the latter. Instinctively, it feels like it should be much harder to take something average and make it good than something that's already excellent and make it amazing. There's a bigger gap to jump, right?
I see what you mean.
So I'm going on the kind of that logic. I think that people who know what ingredients they need to make something fantastic are probably the best cooks.
I think that's good.
I'd love to put myself in that category, but unfortunately, I'm in that group of people that thinks that chili and garlic goes with everything and makes a meal.
I feel that I might be becoming one of those people more and more every day. It is interesting you say that, because moving on to the next chapter of my life, I mean, it is abundantly clear to me how big the need to diversify cooking and food is, but also the place that plays in life. I know it might seem like a microcosm of everything, because it is, because it's just food, but the importance that a good meal can make. Where does that start for you? Is it the people or is it the food?
Always the people. Sounds a bit cliche-ish, but of course the people, because you can have a bit of bread and cheese, which takes no cookery skill whatsoever, and have a brilliant meal, have a brilliant evening with people around a table, right? Or you can have an amazing meal that is, quite literally master chef, on a plate. Company shit and you're buggered, right? You're just going to want to finish up and go as quickly as possible.
I think it's interesting because it's almost like the upper limits of a self-satisfactory lifestyle in that way will never, ever even touch the peaks and the slopes of what it's like to share that fun and goodness with others. And it's interesting that something as myopic as food and what you put in for fuel can be such a stellar example and overlap that much. That, or I'm just drawing meaning where there is none. Regardless.
But people have to eat, right?
Yeah.
I mean, who doesn't like a good old slab of really amazing cake?
Or steak.
Or
This is just going to become me and you talking about the food that we like. And then I want a burger and
yeah, definitely. And let's not even start on shrimps with linguine. You know,
oh my God. Oh, I love shrimp.
It goes back to so the food then evokes the memory, right? So it goes back to your sat in Greece with your really like funny Greek guy, and he comes out with your pile of cleftico or whatever, and it's it does it. Your food goes with memory, so you'll have a really good meal, and actually you'll have something to eat, but you'll have had a really funny evening, a really sad evening. You'll have had, somebody's like cut one out of you, or you just won the lottery. Something occurs, and then you start to relate their food to that day. It's not actually the food; it's the people.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, I honestly, it has been so lovely. I really don't want to have to end it here, but I am now looking at the time on it, and the problem that I have is the longer these go, the less time I get to use. So because I'm obviously doing the big highlight reel, I've got to keep them relatively condensed because I want to use something from all of them. And I don't want to bore you with the statistics because I was bored by the statistics. But it has been so lovely to hear your insights on things. I think you've got such an incredible wealth and range of experience to draw from that when you're in the fast lane, people would be wise to stop and just go, oh, I'll take a minute and hear something from Uncle Stuart. So thank you very much. It's been genuinely lovely, and I hope to see you soon.
No worries. And if you want that picture of me surfing on the top of a jumbo jet with a washboard stomach, eating a bit of cake in Greece,
that could be that might be the logo of the episode.
All right.
Thank you again. All right, you take care.
You're so welcome. Take care.
Lots of love. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.